just as I landed, I got a call from Ruth Cavan. Ruth Cavan was a very important editor from St. Martin's Press. She did amazing stuff. And she said, "This is Ruth Cavan, and I have your book, and we want to publish it. And you won the prize." And I said, "Well, that's great." She says, "The thing is, he's not a private eye. Could you make him a private eye?" I said, "Yes, I can."
Of course.
And we did that, and the book did pretty well. I found out a couple of weeks ago that Sergey Brin listed it as one of his favorite novels. I thought that was pretty good. But that book has been optioned for film. Back in 2001, I was signing Silver Sword, and over in Phoenix, and I got a call from my agent, because after it was published, and I got an agent, right, who said, "Can you be in LA tomorrow, because Jerry Bruckheimer wants to meet you."
Whoa.
So I said, "Yeah, I'll be there." So drove all night, got over there, and we went, and Steve Hamilton and I and Ildy, we drove up there. Why did Steve go with us? I don't remember. Oh, he was with me. He and I were signing books together. So,
Okay.
and I went up, and we were sitting in this beautiful building, waiting for somebody. And my agent was very, very nervous. And I'm looking at all these people going by. Every one of them was gorgeous. Absolutely, just this is one of the big agencies. And I told my agent, I said, "Everybody can tell I'm a writer." And he says, "Yeah, why?" I said, "Because I'm too ugly to be an actor." And he says, "Yeah, you are." So we went in. We met with a couple of people, and Jerry Bruckheimer, and he read the book. He was reading about Silver Sword. He wanted to make a TV show called Diamond Head. CBS wanted to make it. Warner Brothers did not, and it dragged on and on and on through the fall. And finally, Ildy and I were up in Carmel and got a call from my agent, and he says, "Are you armed?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Pull over." He says, "Get out." So I said, "What's going on? What is it?" He said that CBS said that they're tired of messing with it. They're going to do a spinoff of CSI, and they'll call it CSI Miami, and that was the end of it. So that was it. And that was that. That would have been life-changing. It would have been really interesting, but as the way things worked out, it was just fine. Then I got busy doing other things. We developed some homes in Rancho Mirage. I worked for, I represented the Navy on building a Middle Eastern city in the middle of the desert up in 29 Palms. I was the last government representative on that. They could train 40,000 Marines at one time there, and that was really interesting. Did a lot of other stuff, interesting stuff. And then in 2009, I picked up a book, and in it told me about a fellow by the name of Arthur King. Arthur King was a former police detective for LAPD. And he said in 1910, he and Wyatt Earp went up to Searles Valley and got in a big mix-up up there. And there were some interesting things happening, but he wouldn't go into detail. Well, I did from 2009 to a couple of years ago. I did some investigation, and it took me a long time to find out what really happened. This book is what happened. In 1906, Wyatt Earp and his wife, Josie, came to LA, and they had $86,000 or $85,000 in cash and gold, which today's thing is about $3.5 million in cash. That was 1906. They came to town, And by 1910, when this book starts, they were stone cold broke and starving to death.
Oh, huh.
They'd gone through the whole $3.5 million. They'd gambled it away. They were not very good at handling money, and they were not as good at cards as they like to think they were. So that's a tragic beginning. A friend of mine read the first chapter and he started crying. He's a Marine colonel. He said that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. But what Wyatt did was he met a guy named Arthur King, and Arthur King was, at that point, he was retired. He didn't have a retirement, so he was working for the chief, rounding up bail skips, which is the lowest rung of law enforcement. He needed some help, and he thought Wyatt Earp could help him. Wyatt Earp needed a job, so he went with him. And they went down to Mexico, where two alleged murderers had fled after they'd killed a shopkeeper in San Pedro. And they kidnapped him, and they brought him back across they brought him back into the United States. They got just before the Bull Ring in Tijuana. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's right along the shore. They got jumped by the Mexican cavalry, and it was very, very, very close that they made it back across the line. This caused an international incident. Wyatt Earp got fired from LAPD, and there's somebody at the front door. And he was handed another project if he wanted to handle it. It was in Searles Valley. There was a mine up in a place called Trona, and they were. Has anybody been up to Searles Valley?
Where's
Gary,
that?
you were up in what's the Navy base up there?
I was in Lemoore, California.
You were at Lemoore, and just to the east of that is Searles Valley.
Oh, okay.
And east of that is Death Valley. About 70 miles northeast of that is Death Valley. And there's a mine up there that's still in operation today, but they were just getting it started in 1910. And they had a few problems, and they were starting to, the mine company, they were based in San Pedro, were building a track up there, building a railroad, and starting to mine. And then the banks came in and turned and stopped them. And there was a reason for that. You'll find out in the book why. And so that's the story. They go up. He brings in his best friend out of 40 years, Bat Masterson, who was at that point he was the U.S. Marshal for the Southern District of New York, based in Manhattan, and he was also a columnist for the New York Morning Telegraph. And he's one of my favorite characters in this book, and he actually from about the third page on he's involved in this, and interesting fella. He came out to help, and he had a pair of old soldiers from 10th Cavalry, which means they were Buffalo soldiers. And of course Arthur King, and they had some guides. They went across the desert in the middle of summer, and that's part of the book, and it's a real grind. And then when they got there, they found that 8 guns wasn't enough because there were 70 armed men in the camp. So this is the story of the last gunfight. It lasted 4 days, and 3 men came out of it alive. And most of it is true.
Fascinating. How old would Wyatt Earp have been at that time?
62. And I don't worry about 62. When I was 72, I was rappelling down cliffs in Texas. So to go into the last 5 years, 5 years ago, I got a call from very sweet Southern voice. And the lady asked, "How would you like to work for Homeland Security?" And I said, "Doing what?" And she told me, and I said, "Well, that's interesting." So I said, "Yeah." She told me how much, and I said, "Yeah." And 7 months later, they got me started. I should talk louder, is that it? Sorry, 7 months later, I got started there, and it's been some of the most interesting times of my life. For a while, I was there, the guy I was a tunnel rat for Border Patrol. And we located tunnels. We located, you probably have heard, you might have heard, about the tunnel in Yuma that came up in a Kentucky Fried Chicken, came across the border. That was in 2018, 2019. 2019, we found the longest tunnel ever from Tijuana up into Otay Mesa. It was 80 feet deep. That was a wild one. So I did a lot of that. There was a tunnel that came in from the Rio Grande River down in the lower part of Texas, and tunneled directly into the city storm sewer system, and so that the cartels knew exactly what elevation that pipe was at that place. They tunneled right. It was like a rifle shot right into it. Well, we had to get to it. We had to rappel down to the deck, and then right across the river was Mexico, and there was a fella sitting in the jungle, sitting in his chair, and he was watching us, and so I wouldn't let anybody else go in, and went in and came back out and said, "Yeah, that's what they're doing, so we'll fix it." And then I oversaw its remediation. There's a lot of stuff that I've been doing. I'm sorry my friends were here from the base, but that's been a great job. And the next book's going to be called The Tunnel, and it's a story about that, all of those adventures, and they were plenty. So it'll be to me it'll be fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it will come a little sooner.
Yes. Yeah, well,
Good.
I don't think I can wait till I'm 95.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions? No questions.
Well, I'm thinking about it. When they arrived with all that money, obviously it was gambling and drinking and everything, and they got rid of it. But where did the money come from? Was this from all his stealing?
They
And
had-
how old were they then? I'm just trying to get a picture of
Yeah.
where he was in his life.
Well, he would have been 58,
Okay.
and she was about 15 years younger. And no one really knows if they ever really got married. He called her his wife, but there's no record of it anywhere. I mean, people are. This was interesting because I wanted to see if there was how much pushback I'm going to get from anybody on this, and so far I haven't gotten any.
Okay.
Because I made a joke on a website about Wyatt Earp, and I said, somebody once asked Wyatt Earp, "Why do you always carry a 45?" And so he said, "Well, because they don't make a 46." Right, funny. People are, where did you hear that? Cite the book. I want to hear. Okay, all right, I don't care. So I was expecting there to be something, but apparently questions.
Where did they get their money?
Oh, good question. I know.
They don't care what she
I have something. I finished the book.
Yes.
It's fabulous. It's exciting.
Okay.
Really very good. I recommend it.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not related to him.
No, she's not.
just didn't read her.
They actually made quite a bit of money in real estate. When they were up in Nome, Alaska, they built the tallest building in Alaska.
Wow.
2 stories.
Nobody knows these things.
2 stories.
Wow.
They They lived on the top floor, and the bottom floor was a liquor store and a bar. And they never really had a place of their own that wasn't a liquor store or something. They owned the Great Northern, which was a big bar in Nevada, and they sold that, and that's where they got a lot of money. He invested in real estate in San Diego.
Wow.
There's a building down there that claims to have his ownership at one time, and that's probably true. So they made quite a bit of money, and they were up in 1906. They just missed the earthquake. They just had left that to come to Los Angeles. So they'd actually worked very hard, and he works very hard in this, and very hard. And he still. They lived a very old age, to a very old age, and they had an uncertain life the whole time. They made very bad mistakes, bad decisions. So nobody's perfect. I didn't make him a hero in here. He did some heroic stuff, very heroic, but he's a damaged goods. He's a guy that has just made mistakes, and we all pay for our decisions, and that's kind of where it goes.
Did either Wyatt or the other one, Masterson?
Bat Masterson.
Did they have any descendants?
No. Bat never married. The love of his life was a young lady in Dodge, and when he and Wyatt worked together, and he also worked with his younger brother, and there was a Army sergeant, also named King, no relation, who thought that he was in love with her. They were in love with the same girl, and he said, "If I can't have her, nobody can," and he shot her.
Oh.
And then he shot Bat in the pelvis, and Bat killed him. And that's why you see on TV shows, the old Bat Masterson TV show, him walking with a cane. He did walk with a cane
Okay.
quite often. He would get tired because the bullet never was removed from his pelvic bone. But he never had children. Wyatt and Josie tried to have children. Actually, I talk about this in here, but she just couldn't do it. And so Bat seemed to think, at least in my mind, Bat was probably pleased that he didn't have a son, because 5 years before this took place, his youngest brother, Warren, was a constable in a town in Arizona. And one of the things Wyatt Earp did all of his life, he would walk up to somebody, even if he was unarmed, and say, "I'm Wyatt Earp, you have to give me your gun now." And they would do that. The last time it happened, he was 78. It was a few months before he died. He was living in a small town out in Vidal, California, right by the river. And the baker's wife came running over and said, Wyatt, there's a man holding up the bakery, and he's got a gun to my husband's head." So he walks over, unarmed, opens up the door to the bakery, walks in, and says, "I'm Wyatt Earp, you need to give me your gun." He did. And they sat there while the wife went over to the newspaper. This was in 1928. And that was the only telephone they had. They called the sheriff out of Needles, and they waited an hour, and they waited together, calmly, and then the sheriff came and picked him up. But Warren tried that one time. There was a drunk in a bar, and he was shooting up the place, and he said, "I'm Warren Earp, you have to give me your gun," and he shot him in the stomach, and it took him 3 days to die. Wyatt he felt guilty about that, and because of that, it might have been just as well that he did not have a son.
Okay. You have a question, Beck?
Yes, ma'am.
Did he ever build a house with his girlfriend?
I'm
Rosie?
glad you asked me that. Thank you. Yes, he did, and it's in Vidal. When I was at 29 Palms, one of my roommates, we rented a 3-bedroom house, and one of them was a staff sergeant, Marine staff sergeant, the other's a colonel. And so one Saturday, the colonel and I decided we'd drive over to Vidal, because I heard about the house that he built, and we'd try and find it. We drove over there, and we found it. Vidal is a bunch of ruins now, with the exception of about 2 or 3 houses. And one of them was the house. I saw it from half a mile away. I said, this is it, I can't believe it. So we pulled up, and we get out and we're looking around. And it was in pretty good shape back in 2010. And about 30 seconds later, truck pulls around, lady gets out, older lady gets out with a shotgun. And she said, what are you doing? And Bob says, well, this is Chuck Knief, and he's an author, and he's writing about, oh, you want to look inside? Oh, yeah. So we did, and I had my camera, and we went in and took pictures of the inside and the outside. It's the only house that Wyatt ever built for her. It was just a house. And there inside, there's a picture on the wall of the house as it was when they lived there. It's a lot prettier now. And now it has air conditioning, but it is, back then it was pretty rugged. But what that replaced was a tent. They would come down and spend 6 months in a tent down along the Colorado River. He had some silver mines and gold mines that he would try and work on. And then when it got hot, they'd come to LA, and that's kind of how they ended up their lives. But there was something else I wanted to say, but I forgot, so sorry about that.
How did you research all this?
Oh, a lot. I read everything I could get.
Yeah.
There's some excellent biographies of him, and not a whole lot of it this area in his life. This was almost like Casey Terwilliger wrote that. He had that wonderful book, and that goes right up to the point, and then it stops, and then it goes on again. And this is a novel. It's not a book. It's a novel. There is enough in here that I'm pretty confident that it happened this way, but I can't prove it. And a lot of with some exceptions, a lot of the dialogue is mine. It's what I would think they were going to say, which is why it's a novel, not a history book. But there's one place in here where a deputy U.S. Marshal comes up when he's having breakfast and sticks his gun in Wyatt's stomach before breakfast. Wyatt went berserk. He grabbed his guns and threw them, and then he buffaloed the guy on the head. And he said, it's word for word what he said in there.
Wow.
You don't do that to me, ever. So, yes, ma'am.
How do you go about writing a book? What's your first thing? Do you have like a whiteboard where you start putting things, characters and stuff?
That would be really smart, but I don't do that. I'm not that smart. I sometimes I do. This one was there. First thing I did on this, I wrote the screenplay, and that became a pretty good guide from where I was going to go. But I still didn't have all the information, so it just sort of grew. This one I wrote like 4 times, and I just would keep going back and making corrections and additions until it is what it is. Okay.
What did you do before, and you may have said this and I missed it, what did you do before your writing career?
Oh, well, I'm an engineer and I'm a contractor, and I did a little bit of both. Did a lot of both, actually. my gosh. My wife and I did some development in the desert out there. I like to tell people that I've had more time in the desert than Moses. He only had 40 years. So, but built a lot of things. The last 5 years has been really fun because I've traveled the whole southern border and the whole northern border from the Pacific over to Lake Superior, and the whole southern border. I've driven all the way down to Brownsville, and I have things going on right now in Yuma and just about everywhere.
Very interesting.
And I'm having a lot of fun doing what I'm doing now. It's going to be, my wife is afraid what I'm going to do now. She's not sure what I'll do, but we'll do something.
How long does it take you to write a book?
Sand Dollars took me about 3 months.
Wow.
This one took 12 years.
So it depends.
It depends. I have several books that I just need to finish. One I wrote 20 years ago. It's called An Absence of Light. And that is part of a statue by John Sanborn that's in the brand new, which is now 20 years old, CIA headquarters. It's a sculpture, and it has code on it, and people go out there and have their sandwiches and try and decode it, and only the first 2 lines have been decoded, and the first one is the absence of light. And there is it will be decoded someday, but maybe not in my lifetime. But it's about, actually, that's the Orange County book. It's a standalone, and I just can't seem to finish it because I don't want to. So.
Okay.
I was just going to say, Chuck, most of the book takes place in the desert. And
Yes.
you just mentioned to her that you've spent a lot of time in the desert. When I'm reading this book, I'm in the desert. I mean, what exactly have you done in the desert? I mean, have you traversed Death Valley yourself? Have you done something like that?
No, I've been to Death Valley, but I've never traversed it. Hildy and I drove up to where the pinnacles are. We walked around it, and that was interesting because it gave me a pretty good idea of what was really happening there. But I've done a lot of hiking through the desert. When I was at 29 Palms, go up 3-4 times a week, up to the monument and hike up through there with friends. Sometimes I'd go alone. One time I went alone, and I have no idea what it was I ran into, but I was carrying a .45. Actually, it was a .454, and this was after I had been in the hospital, and I just wanted to make sure I was okay. So I drove up there after work, and it was in August, and up in the Joshua Tree Monument, it's about 20 degrees cooler than it is down where the base is. So I went up there and I did some hiking around, and I got into this cove, and it was starting to get dark, and I heard a noise like I've never heard in my life. I don't know what it was. The only thing I can understand, I understood it to be, you're not wanted here, go away. So I took that as a polite invitation for me to leave, and I did. I don't know what it was. I think it might have been a male cougar, because it wasn't the high-pitched, and it wasn't a roar. The only major cats we have that in North America or in the Americas that roar is a jaguar, and it wasn't a jaguar. Although I've seen jaguars and they are scary as hell. But whatever it was, so I did the merry-go-round thing with my gun out all the way back to my car because it was getting dark. Didn't get hurt, but so I've been everywhere up there, all over the place. And the area where I had them traverse north of Victorville is still pretty wild and rugged today. There's very few things going on up there. Okay.
If there's no more questions, thank you so much. Very
Thank you.
interesting. Very good. And you'll be happy to sign books, I assume?
Delighted to.
All right.
Yeah.
So, anybody need a book?